Okay, now we're live and mic'd and good to go, and I think we're live out on the internet. So, hi friends out on the internet, welcome. We're going to be talking today about the enterprise automation stack migration accelerator that you may have seen during our keynote presentations this morning. I am Trevor Hess. I'm our lead partner solutions architect that works with Microsoft here at Chef, and I'm joined today by Eugene Chuvyrov from Microsoft. Eugene, if you want to introduce yourself.
Certainly. Eugene Chuvyrov. I am a cloud architect at Microsoft. I've been working with Chef for about 18 months now. So here to give you guys talk about the options that you have when it comes to end of support for SQL Server 2008, Windows Server 2008, and our partnership with Chef that kind of enables solutions to help you overcome that.
Yeah.
So go ahead, kick it off.
I guess first and foremost, Eugene, we should probably talk about the impending doom.
So you guys have all seen the keynote, right? Trevor did this amazing demo. So in this session, we're going to get into this demo in depth. But sort of like setting the stage, that's my job, set the stage here. There's 2 dates to keep in mind, and most of you are probably already familiar with those dates. So the first one is coming up pretty quickly, July 9, 2019, is the extended support for SQL Server 2008 is going to pretty much cease. And the next one is about 6-7 months away, January 14, 2020. That's when Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2008 R2 extended support comes basically to the end of life. So and just before we go to this next slide, I just want to kind of take a step back and, yesterday did the whole session of end of support, so it's like really fresh in my mind. I can talk for 45 minutes just about end of support itself. But that's not what we're here to talk about. But if you step back in time 10 years ago, Windows 2008 Server was truly revolutionary for that time period. I mean, that's where the Hyper-V virtualization technology was introduced. The applications were transitioning from 32-bit to 64-bit. At that time, I mean, that certainly seemed like this next big thing. But now, 10 or 11 years later, here we are, right? Windows 2008 is really a legacy technology. But certainly we have created a set of apps, a lot of our business critical apps that depend on the functionality still present there. So let's just see what options we have today, first let's see what happens when the support deadline hits here shortly. So probably the most important thing is going to be no future security updates or hot fixes. So any vulnerabilities detected in the platform will kind of go unaddressed, and so essentially, basically, you will be operating on an unsupported platform in a data center. So potentially, certainly severe cost implications should you decide to continue operating those servers on-prem. You will have to purchase basically additional features from Microsoft to continue potentially security updates, which increases the cost. And then certainly potentially engage Premier or additional support options to if you decide to stay basically maintain the status quo. Status quo is going to be slightly costly here. Next slide, please. But there's certainly options, right? And that's what we're here to talk about. And the options are, in my opinion, fairly amazing. So let's talk about the amazing options first, right? If you choose to migrate your Windows 2008 server or SQL Server 2008 workloads into Azure, you get 3 years of extended support for free from Microsoft. So that's the amazing option, right? And then even within this option, you have a couple of ways you can do this. You can implement this migration. You can just basically do this lift and shift, where you migrate from your existing 2008 infrastructure, Windows 2008 Server infrastructure, into a Windows 2008 Server infrastructure into Azure. This way, you get the security updates for 3 years. Basically, level of effort is medium. I would say it's even on the lower side, because literally it's just kind of lifting and shifting things into the cloud. However, there's another things that you should probably consider at this point. This end of support can serve sort of as a forcing function, so to speak, or a time to evaluate potentially, maybe you should migrate to cloud-native application architecture, perhaps rewriting the application, or maybe just replatforming it in certain ways, taking advantage of some cloud-native technologies. So level of effort there is fairly high, but I guess, and that's the punchline coming in the next slide, It's high, but there's definitely options for you to evaluate. So just kind of putting this aside for now, I mean, certainly cloud migration to the cloud is the recommended way for you to actually address this end of support. However, you can choose to stay on-prem. So you can choose to, and if you stay on-prem and run Windows 2008 servers, basically you're running an unsupported version of the operating system, and you will have to purchase premium contracts to continue operating that. But also you can migrate to the latest version of Windows Server or SQL Server, which will enable you to take some of the advantages of this newer application platform or software platform. Okay, so kind of those are the options. Stay on-prem, migrate to the cloud. If you migrate to the cloud, you get 3 years of extended support. Basically, within this migration to the cloud, let's drill into this specific piece, right? So what if there was a better way for you to actually implement the migration to Azure? What if you could migrate to Azure without rewriting applications? So Trevor, maybe you can share, how can we get there?
So we're going to build up to that, Eugene. So there's other ways we could do this where we don't have to worry about that friction of managing those applications ongoing with no life cycle capabilities on these legacy systems. We also want to be in a state where we can ensure the ongoing compliance of our systems now that they're in the cloud in this new environment that they've not been in previously. And we want to avoid those costs from end of support. So the question that we all like to ask is, what if you had a faster way to move into Azure than just doing a lift and shift effort or trying to do a massive rewrite? What if you had an easier way than doing a lift and shift or a massive rewrite? So this is where our enterprise automation stack comes back into play. So as we create that capability to have all of our applications, our infrastructure, our security rules expressed as code, we can now enable all of those capabilities on our applications, including our legacy applications. So that means that we can codify how our applications are built and managed and deployed. We can codify the infrastructure layer that our applications need to sit on top of. And we can codify the compliance rules that define when we know that our systems are safe, secure, and up to date with our policies. Now, we've been through this, we've seen the layer cake a few times today. I'm just going to go through this one quickly. We've got Chef Workstation as our base layer where we do our development work. We've got Chef Infra for the infrastructure layer. We've got Chef Inspec for that compliance rule set. We've got Chef Habitat to manage our applications. And we have Chef Automate so that we have visibility into those applications in their longer life cycle. Now, the challenge with this, of course, is this is a lot of code to write if you don't have any of it, especially for these legacy applications that, as I said earlier in the keynote, they have enough value, typically, where they're still around, but they're low enough value that they don't warrant that cost of a rewrite or the effort it would take to bring these apps into the future, especially with the best-of-breed patterns and practices like the capabilities enabled by the enterprise automation stack. So we went out to a few of our customers over the past few months, and we started working on a tool to solve this problem of there's a lot of upfront effort to enable these capabilities for these heritage applications. So we went and we tried to package some of these legacy IIS applications. And we went and we went and we went and we went and we made some, we found the files that we needed on these different systems with different customers. We were taking time, it would take us up to a week to build a full habitat plan to capture these applications. But after doing that, we recognized that there were a bunch of common patterns that emerged as we were doing that, and that we could potentially add some automation to make it so that you can get all of those features of the enterprise automation stack at basically the click of a button. So the solution we're talking about is the Enterprise Automation Stack Migration Accelerator that you saw earlier today during the keynote. And I'll show it to you again in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. What that tool allows you to do is, first thing we're going to do is we go out onto the server that you point the migration accelerator at, and we look at IIS, and we ask it what applications and sites it has running in it. It doesn't matter if it's a .NET 3.5 app, a .NET 4, .NET 4.5, or even if it's a content-only site. We can take that catalog of applications running inside of IIS, find all of the content from those sites and their dependencies, whether those dependencies are strewn throughout the system or hidden in the GAC. We can go crawl the dependency tree and pull all those DLLs together into a package so that we can then redeploy it later. Once we have that content package, we need those enterprise automation stacks in the second phase here so that we can recreate those applications in their new home. So we generate a Chef habitat plan, and we generate a Chef inspect file, and we generate a Azure pipelines file so that you can deploy and validate those applications straight up into Azure DevOps to be sure that your application works and can be built again into this future new home in the cloud or wherever you need to put it. So once we have those artifacts, we then can take them, automatically put them into a repository, a private repository, mind you, and put them through that pipeline so that we can immediately take that newly built artifact and go deploy it onto a system to test it and validate it to see that it does what we expect it to do. Now, this application, potentially for the first time in its entire history, has a continuous integration platform. So you can take those applications, and even if they're captured and they happen to be missing a component, you can find that. You could update the code that was generated to include whatever artifact was missing and run it back through that pipeline to validate it again. And so what we've seen going out with customers now is that we can take these applications, pull them down. If there is something missing, we've been able to get that remediated and then deployed back into Azure in an hour, which is super cool because that takes it from that week we talked about initially down to that hour, which makes it much more manageable when we're talking about hundreds, potentially, of these legacy applications that folks still have running in their environments today.
But Trevor, we only have 30 minutes. We don't have an hour.
Wow, I guess I was talking too much. I thought, was that interesting, or was I talking too much?
You were totally talking too much. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, well, now I'm going to show the fun stuff again.
I think you have to flip the switch.
Switch flipped.
Awesome.
So this may look familiar. That's because this is actually the same environment we were looking at this morning. It's our same legacy application running out on Windows Server 2008. And just like this morning, I'll even go so far as to prove it to you. So I'm going to go into my desktop folder here where I've got some little helper scripts here. No, I don't want to change directory to ls. And LD isn't a thing either. I can't type. It's all this energy and excitement. I just can't help myself. So I'll take an inspect test. It's going to validate that our site is out there and running and that it is not running on 2008. The problem is the app is running on 2008, so my test is going to fail, as you can see here. Now, I'm going to need to go and capture our site. But before I do that, because this is going to move a little quickly, I want to show you that my Azure DevOps instance is actually empty. I'm not hiding something that's out here and staged. So I'm just going to refresh my repos here so you can see my EAS demo is completely empty. I'll show you my Azure pipelines. There are none. So now, in nearly the blink of an eye, if I run our tool here to go and capture the application and pull it back down, The app's already been captured. The zip has already been created. It's been pulled back across the wire. It's back on our system now. And I can run my script to upload that to Azure DevOps so that it's enrolled in the Azure repo and enrolled in its Azure pipeline. So now, when I come back over to Azure DevOps, here's the captured code. Now, we kind of went through this a little bit during the keynote, but we didn't talk to it. So let me walk through what's in here. So we actually have a nice detailed log that comes back from the tool to walk you through exactly what the tool does and is doing while it's finding the dependencies for your application and the various applications that are running out there. So you can see the details of what's happening. Yes, thank you, Scott. Oh, wrong one. I'm on a Mac on Windows, so. All right, let me tuck that over so there's a little bit more screen to see here. Sorry about that. Thank you, Scott. So you can see the output that comes from the site. So it's finding things, it's creating them, it's packaging everything up, and then it's going to be sending that back across the wire. And when it's sending back across that wire, it's got our package here. So it's got our habitat plan. It's basically going to take those files that it found so that it can deploy them into the package when it's built. You've got your configuration file, which, as I mentioned during the keynote, we've actually already automatically parameterized some of those common configuration settings that exist in IIS applications, like the database connection strings, right? Anybody who's really developed anything in .NET knows, there's either an app config typically or a web config that probably has some information about how that site connects to something. So those are going to be parameters that we need to change when we move our application into a new home, because it's going to need to know how to talk to the also probably new database or the old database. So with that, obviously that means we have to have a config file that's templatized. So we capture that config file from the target system and put it in here to break in those parameterized configuration settings. So now that's how, when we run that package in Habitat, it's able to repopulate those variables.
Hey, Trevor, can you just pause for a second?
Yeah.
Are you guys all familiar with kind of Azure DevOps and the interface Trevor's looking at here? Sort of. If you guys are not, is Azure DevOps formerly known as VSTS, or Visual Studio Team Services?
The artist formerly known as VSTS.
Artist formerly known as VSTS. So it's basically, it's our first-party tool built by Microsoft to actually not just, not for CI/CD pipelines is what Trevor is showing you, but also to help you manage your issues via boards and potentially basically obviously manage repos. But the major function and the functionality that we're interested in today is this Azure DevOps pipelines, which is the interface Trevor is demoing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eugene. Thank you for pointing that back out. I forgot. We talked about that.
No, certainly, and I guess it's just sort of like circling back to what the point Trevor mentioned in passing before is, for the first time in this application's lifetime, let's assuming this was developed in 2008 or so, 2009, potentially there was no such thing as DevOps, and there was no such thing as, I guess, CI/CD pipelines. Perhaps there were, but let's assume there were.
I think 2009 might have been one of the first DevOps days. I don't remember my DevOps days history. Right, nobody's saying no out in the room, so I'm going to say yes.
So you can just see that the application never probably had that pipeline before, but now you're not only migrating into Azure and just deploying, kind of allowing you to resolve this end of support issue, but also introducing the modern DevOps practices around that.
So speaking of the pipeline, here is that pipeline. So what we've got here is we've got a Azure pipeline YAML file that's defined, leveraging the Habitat extension for Azure DevOps so that we can automatically enroll things like our Habitat signing keys so that we can create our packages underneath our origin, as well as making sure that Habitat is installed on a target build agent and things like that. So now we can actually see what's going on in here. If we go poke at the job, we see that it's going to be grabbing all the code, putting our origin keys in place, building the plan, and then it is going to create that artifact, put it into Azure Artifacts so that we can pull it down. So I have that artifact downloaded already. and I actually have it loaded in my supervisor back over here. Unfortunately, because of the way PowerShell scaling works, I'm not going to be able to bump that up super easily. So we're just going to, that's the habitat output. But if I come back over here and I go to my local deployment, here's this very same application that we just ran the capture on. We just pushed through a pipeline. I loaded it into Habitat on my local system and pointed it to the new database that I created in Azure SQL. So now our application that literally minutes ago was just running on that SQL, or that Windows Server 2008 box is now running on my Windows Server 2016 box with basically no effort on your part. So that's what that does. And again, just to kind of touch back on some of those points we made during the demo this morning, these packages can be run in containers as well if your application is suited to doing so. So we actually have an Azure container registry running with Azure container instances so that we can run Windows containers. So this is our container running over here. So if I go over here and copy that and go to, helps if I use the right copy command for the right system, and paste that over here. Here is our container that's running our movie database application, running in Azure. Well, it's also running on my 2016 box. So regardless of where I need my application, I can put it there. I can put it in the place that it runs best.
So how difficult of a configuration change is that for you to change basically the destination?
To change the destination? So it's as easy as saying you want to export that package differently. So I can build my package to be built as a Habitat artifact that can be deployed to any given VM, or I can deploy it out to any given container instance by exporting it to a container and then uploading it to my registry of choice.
Cool.
So with that, I'm going to cut back over here. And I'm going to talk about where we've done this before. One of the first places we went and ran this out with was a major airline. They had some .NET applications running on IIS. We used an earlier version of this tool to scan and repackage those applications. This was before we added the capabilities to automatically enroll in repos and Azure DevOps. So we actually just tested these packages locally, and we had them deployed into Azure with Terraform. And in this iteration, we had those applications packaged and running in our Azure in less than 3 hours. And by sound in the audience that nobody knows who it is, how fun was that?
It was awesome.
Thank you. When another customer we went out and did this with a little bit more recently was a major media company. So they had some .NET 2.0 applications running on IIS. Again, we ran the enterprise automation stack migration accelerator to scan and repackage those applications. We tested them locally, deployed it up into Azure repos, deployed it into Azure pipelines, and then finally actually deployed that Habitat artifact into Azure. And again, we had these applications packaged and running in Azure in less than 3 hours. So what does that mean, right? When we've got these applications moved, that means we've now easily migrated into Azure. We can decommission those Windows Server 2008 R2 boxes, which, as opposed to if you just did that lift and shift, yes, Eugene is a very generous person and is going to give us 3 more years of security updates out of the goodness of his heart. But
absolutely.
You're still on
only
2008.
if you move to Azure.
Only if you move to Azure. But you're still on Windows Server 2008, which means, guess what? 3 years from now, even if you're not working at where you're working at now, somebody else is kicking that can also, and that problem's going to come right back. Now you've got a solution that can help you get rid of that operating system altogether. And the next time an operating system reaches end of support, you can move it again with ease. These apps now also, as we mentioned, they may have lifecycle again for the first time in years, if not from a continuous integration perspective, potentially ever. And you can easily manage those dependencies and security updates for those application components and libraries that you need to keep that application running. And you can run that application where it runs best, whether that's on a VM or in a container. You can pick the best suited environment for your applications. So talking a little bit about where this tool is going in the future. As you can see, we've already done some of this ahead of ChefConf. So we've built the automatic parameterization of some of those common attributes, getting everything captured and uploaded in a single command instead of separating them is a little bit of wiring we have in mind. We're also looking at accelerators for other platforms, and other app types, so enabling accelerators for Windows applications and services, Java-based web applications like JBoss or Tomcat, and then, of course, any of the other systems that you all have as common problems that you would like to see enabled to get off of these legacy systems. And then we're waiting on a feature from Azure to make it so that we can also create Azure pipeline files for you so that you can pipeline your applications to the spot that makes the most sense for a release. So I'm going to share a little bit of a little visualization on this, and I'm hoping that's not legible at all. But that's fine, I'll talk to it. On the left side of the screen, you'll see where we're starting from in the legacy environment. So we're calling that's the Windows Server 2008 box. It may have ASP.NET 3.5, 4.5, just regular ASP sites, content sites. We run the accelerator against that. We pull those apps out, those sites out. We bring them into our local system, and we get all of the enterprise automation stack artifacts generated and packaged. We upload that to a repository, whether that's Azure Repos, GitHub, whatever your choice is. We then put that into your pipeline tool so that we can get those heart files ready, or we're going to export them to containers. And that's where we get to the fun future stuff, where we're working towards getting it to the point where you can have this automatically generate Terraform so that you could put your applications where it needs to go with some Terraform content as well, so that you can automatically get these things not only captured, but on the path to where they need to go at the end, whether that's a VM or a container running in a container repository, in a container Kubernetes instance, or anything like that. The other thing you saw today that is cool that can kind of come to help with some of this, we now have the Enterprise Automation Stack dashboard view, so you can get information about those applications that you've now moved into Azure and see how they're doing, what their health is, and what's going on with them, which is super helpful. And with that, that is the majority of the me flapping my mouth, as Eugene might put it, part of the conversation. I'm actually very interested to hear what questions all of you might have. So we're very fortunate to be joined today by Stuart Preston, who is actually one of the folks who wrote the tool itself.
Hi.
So if we have even deeper questions.
Thanks, Trevor.
So instead of going to Azure, can we go on-prem 2016?
Eugene's going to plug his ears for a minute.
I thought he was going to say something else. But yeah, that's cool. That's legit.
Yes. So one of the capabilities that Stuart has built into the tool is the ability to provide other pipeline tooling pieces, right? So if you absolutely can't use Azure DevOps, you could have it generate a different type of file for the CI/CD tool of your choice. But the accelerator itself doesn't necessarily need to be deployed to Azure. It's just the customers we've been working with have preferred Azure.
Is the accelerator available today?
It is.
And where can we find it?
So if you want to use the accelerator, you want to reach out to your Chef team, or like Corey had shown us earlier, you can go to chef.io/migration to fill out that migration assessment form, and we'll be happy to help you get started. Also, you know where to find me.
So I have a few questions. I guess I'll start with the packaging, the artifact itself. Mm-hmm. So you're packaging up the binaries for a particular site, correct, in IIS?
Yep.
So how does it understand what version of .NET and all the dependencies that it needs to pull in? Like, that's just magic.
Stuart, would you like to take away the magic and make it science?
You said you weren't going to put me on the spot, Trevor. No, the tool goes and interrogates the IIS config on the machine to go and look at the app pools to identify like all the sites that are running on the server. So as part of that, we identify the managed framework version. And then we kind of reflect on a whole bunch of assemblies using that framework version to assemble everything needed that can go into the Habitat package. That was the short version. There is a tool that needs to be installed on the target machine, but it doesn't interact. It's not like installed as a tool on the machine. It's just a zip file. We push a CLI tool to the machine. It's built in .NET Core. So no, it's complete. It's framework independent. The tool itself. Yeah. I'm like, we need sort of need. How do we do?
So the question was, how do we let the application pool know which version it should be running? Or was that sorry?
So we extract out information from the application pool.
Hold on. Let him restate his question so I can repeat it. Yeah. Hand him the.
Well, let me hand this.
Do we have another mic back there by chance? A hand mic?
So under IIS, you have the option to run an application pool as a specific user. How does it migrate that data across?
Okay, so running as a specific user is one of those capabilities that you would enable using the remediation piece we talked about. So it would create that application pool, right? And it's going to create that under the default user, right, on the system. And so when you get the DSC that creates that app pool, you would modify that to include the user that you need to run as, and then run it back through the pipeline and build it from there.
Yeah, we're extracting just enough information to get your app running, and then we've got enough information to build the Habitat artifacts that are needed for you to go and modify and put those into your pipeline and adjust them and so on.
What happens if you have like 10 sites on your IS box?
So it's capable of pulling all of the sites out. So you can specify a specific target site if you only want to pull one of them. But if you just let the tool go, it's going to pull out all the sites, all the applications, and create packages for them.
Did you have a question?
Can you use the tool to run a scan against like a fleet of servers?
So the tool itself doesn't have anything built into it to do that, but you could potentially orchestrate that with Chef. You could deploy that out with Habitat, whatever you would. So what we've been doing with customers right now is it's typically been in the scope of the POCs we've done. It's been at a specific target machine, not at a set of target machines yet. But yeah, basically the tool you could orchestrate to run at scale.
So if you have like a bunch, if you're talking about having multiple sites, if they're kind of like a ball of wax where they sort of have dependencies on one another and things like that, do you end up with like one artifact that you deploy that sort of runs all of those sites, or does it split things up? Or
So it's going to split things up because there's separate applications and sites inside of IIS. Now this is another situation where you would do some more work on the other side, right? So you may have 10 different packages that get created that run those applications. That's where you would use the capabilities inside of Habitat to do the service discovery components to recreate those connections and dependencies between them. So that if you have a front end that can't start without its API, then you would create that dependency through Habitat to say that I, as the front end, can't start without my API.
So how do you handle like web configs that have secrets, like databases and that type of stuff, with it being committed to Git?
So Habitat has a secrets mechanism that you can use. You can either leverage that secrets mechanism built into Habitat, or you can leverage whatever secret solution you use in-house, whether that's Vault or like Azure Key Vault, whatever you use.
So do we need like a git ignore before we run your code? Because like the demo you showed this morning, right? When it initialized a Git repo and then pushed it to Git,
So that's why in the current version, it pushes it as a private repo,
Okay.
right? So that it's not being put out as a public secret.
Okay.
But that's potentially something we could write in as a scrub. Hey, long time.
Hi. I'm very confused. Are you actually copying any part of the Windows 2008 binaries?
So it depends on how you mean by the binaries. The .NET components that you may install as like a add Windows feature. If it is a .NET DLL component that's a part of that the site depends on through its dependency tree, it is going to pull that DLL in so that the application can use it when it comes back online.
So to me, that looks like that's an unmaintained DLL that you're propagating. It also looks like it'd be licensed code.
Eugene?
Potentially, I guess, but I mean, probably have to look at it one by one basis. I mean, it's just, not sure if I have a good answer for you there, I guess.
Yeah, I'd like to understand.
No, you want to take a crack at that, Stuart? Is that what?
Like concerns in more detail.
Well, my next question was kind of in line with how that pipeline works and it checking in binaries directly into the repositories. And then basically you don't have your source code. So basically
Bingo.
you have an unmanaged file, a zip.
Yep.
It's not versioned, but it has versions of stuff in it.
Yep.
That is a super bad thing to be doing in a pipeline.
Well, that would be true if these are applications that are being developed regularly. In most cases, the applications that we've been talking about are not. And when you do have the source code available, you can integrate that back into Habitat with the rest of that build process that was created for you. So in the situations where these applications do still have source code available, you can pull those things back into line. But if you need to get that application out of there, you can get the application out, get everything generated, get it pipelined, and even if you needed to modify one of those other files, you can just update the pipeline, or update the repository with that new version of the file, rebuild it in a versioned Habitat package, and continue forward with operating your site.
But it makes it very difficult to update the dependencies outside of Habitat. So if you have some third-party dependencies that you're pulling down with NuGet or something like that, and then you have the potential to update them, and then you have the package that's versioned somewhere else, and then you want to make changes to your source code itself, like you have, it just creates a web, a mess, a DLL hell.
I mean, DLL hell's been around forever. But that's what I'm saying is you can bring that source code back into Habitat so that you can manage those dependencies and those pinnings. If you're talking about an application that doesn't have any of that, you're not going to be going back and worrying about NuGet packages or those other things. You're literally going to be taking the stuff that's out there. It's very similar to what you would try to do in an OS to the same OS lift and shift, right? You're going to be taking all the things that application is, and rather than making the container the operating system with all the security questions around the operating system, you're taking the application and that business value, wrapping it all together and making it into a package that you can move and modify through a pipeline in whatever way that it works best for you, right? So yes, you are right in that that problem exists, but I'm not sure that there's a better way to handle it without doing a full rewrite. Is there a current deployment pipeline? You're totally right for an application that's undergoing active development. You would want to start in a different spot, right? You might use the capture tool to create the deployment piece of it, but you would want to fold in your source code side of things up front.
one of the things that I found out early on when I was working on finding IIS stuff is our developers had 3 DLLs that were on all of our servers because we'd never wiped them before, and it took me 2 weeks to find out that those DLLs actually were on the servers, but not in our source code, right? So this tool sounds like a great way to even just look at it and go, that's everything that I need. You might never use it actually for lifting and shifting, but you could use it as a template to start looking at what the code's actually happening too, which was the reason I came here.
Sorry, can you talk into the mic?
The best use case I can come up with in my head is that if you have a application that you can no longer compile.
That's the best use case, but there are hundreds of those applications out there, and lots of large enterprises have that problem throughout them.
No other use case scales, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, that's what I said, right? Like that's where you would use your source code into Habitat for those situations, right?
Hi, my name is Eugene Dalton. I'm from Microsoft. I've got a comment in relation to the question the gentleman over here asked about the licensing and the unmanaged DLL. The license, essentially what we're talking about here is a scenario where you've got a dead application, essentially, on an out of support environment, and you're trying to give it more life by bringing it to something else. Now, the license for the DLL will be conveyed by the destination that you're running that application on. So we don't license a single DLL at a time, you license the operating system. So the license for that DLL is covered. True, it is now essentially an orphaned DLL that will never be updated unless you do something about it. But if you leave it in the source, it's never going to get updated anyway because that's now out of support. So essentially it's the least of the 2 bad scenarios, if you like. And the same thing is true of the other debate down the front about, yes, you wouldn't set out to do this, but it's a better solution than leaving things as they are. And it's less work than having to rebuild them all.
Cool, thanks, you.
Cool. Oh, the question over here was there?
One more before time. Of course, right.
Yeah, one use case that I can personally think of for even apps where we have code for them is these legacy applications that are near the end of maintenance or end of life that you can't quite get rid of, that the corporation still finds ways to keep using, or we still have those 1 or 2 customers we can't just tell them to go migrate to something else. With a tool like this, we could theoretically just point this automated migration tool at it and package up the application as is, throw it onto Win2K16, and check a whole bunch of compliance items off our task list without having to waste lots of our cycles reverse engineering a POS app that nobody really cares about except these 1 or 2 influential people we can't say no to. So kind of just my 2 cents.
Quickly.
Yeah.
Will there be future for going to a Azure web app for this instead of going to a container or a virtual machine?
So those are conversations that Eugene and I have been having for a couple months now. It takes a little bit of time to make that happen.
Cool.
Awesome.
No, I just wanted me to recap and just kind of remember what we led into this, how we led this conversation is. It's end of support. And hopefully that addresses some of the use cases. So you have essentially an unsupported operating system, lacking security patches, probably out of compliance soon. So this tool would allow you to actually be in compliance, get the latest security patches on the OS while still having the application running. So certainly, I mean, there's definitely a benefit and tremendous value.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming. I'll be around for a bit, so thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you.